Well, it's lovely to talk to you. Unfortunately, top of mind is, of course, Ukraine. I see your pin, and the subject of this talk, I think, actually lends itself well to starting there, because trust in digital governance. How does this war that we're dealing with shine a light on some of the work you're doing and some of the trust issues we have around digital?
Before we even get to digital, just the mere fact that there is war in Europe, it changes Europe by the hour, and it changes the world by the hour. Because just the fact that it was, over the Syrian war, I think over 2 years' time, 2 million people, give or take, came to Europe. Within the last 2 weeks, 2 million people have come to Europe. So it's a war, it's military aggression against Ukraine, but it's also, a catastrophe for so many people. They lose their loved ones, they need to say goodbye at train stations. The only good thing to say about it is that it shows that evil brings good. So many people are opening their hearts, their homes, to host refugees. The international community is coming together. What Europe has achieved with the US, with Canada, with Japan, with the sanctions over the last couple of months, is unprecedented. So, of course, this will be with us for some time. We have now radical uncertainty as to what will come, but it also shows that in a war, what is important is, of course, what information can you get? Can you actually know what is happening on ground? And cybersecurity is now a real situation on ground.
Maybe before we get into all the digital stuff, since we're talking about Europe's position, and you are a commissioner, so a spokesperson here for Europe, maybe tell us a little bit more about how this war is going to change Europe. Because already we're seeing so many changes in terms of relying on exports, energy imports from Russia, for instance, and increasing defense spending. How do you see it changing?
Well, of course, this is really different from the pandemic. But in the pandemic, what you saw was the European institution that I represent, the European Commission, taking initiatives for Europe to come together to fight the pandemic. So we developed the Corona Pass, that you could show that you were vaccinated or immune, so that you could travel and you could go to a restaurant. We developed a vaccine strategy so that every member state had the same access to vaccines. And that made member states trust the union to build a much stronger thing together when it comes to health for the future. And here, already now, I think we see the same thing. That when we take initiatives that enables member states to come together, it immediately says that we need to do more together. So we will change, I think, when it comes to defense. My own country, I'm from Denmark, and Denmark has an opt-out on defense. That has put up for a referendum on the 1st of June. Everywhere in Europe, defense budgets will increase, and part of that increase will be a European increase, especially when it comes to cyber defense, because here it's really difficult to do things alone. You need to come together as a community.
Will Ukraine join the EU?
That may be eventually.
Can't happen quickly?
Oh, if you knew the legislation that you have to do.
This feels like an emergency.
But one thing is becoming a member with everything that comes with it. It's a completely different thing to be, a friend, a neighbor, a partner that you stand up for. We had, there was a debate in the European Parliament. It was really touching because President Zelensky addressed us, so did the Speaker of their Parliament. Then our President, the French, all spoke. And the reason why I think it was really moving was that it was speeches after action. All the sanctions, they were already implemented on ground, they had their effect in Russia. And then came the speeches about what we're fighting for. And the reason why I think it was so strong was that a lot of people have experienced the opposite. Speeches, then action, or speeches and not so much action. But here, actually, everyone stood up for doing what they could to disable the war machine.
What stood out to you most in that speech that he gave you guys?
Well, I think that the mere courage, the fact that they are so brave to stand up to a war machine, unprecedented aggression on ground, to see people, doing what they can with no military background, neither has the precedence as such, and yet to stand up for it. I found, very, very encouraging and moving, and I think a lesson for everyone that we're not in any way done fighting for democracy and freedom.
Is there anything more Europe can do right now?
Yes, there's more to be done, and right now they are negotiating next packages of sanctions in order to move in, of course, closer. And at the same time, we are not just accelerating, but really accelerating the process to be independent from Russian fuels.
Yeah.
That be coal, that be oil, that be gas. And that, of course, is also good for fighting climate change, because it will mean that we will go into so many more renewables, and we will do it so much faster than otherwise planned.
Because there's this narrative that Europe focused too much on fighting climate change and therefore wasn't as focused as much on the need for fossil fuels and the dependence on Russia.
Well, I think actually the situation now has proved the necessity for the green transition, because without getting into all kinds of renewables, that be solar, wind, hydro, whatever, batteries in particular, there's no way that you can be independent. And energy independency is key to sovereignty in a digital age, because without electricity, well, you're not powered.
Which brings us to the topic of
Yes.
conversation on digital. You mentioned disinformation. President Putin has banned now Facebook and Instagram, and I think TikTok and other sites from the Russian people. What should we do about that? Is that a problem to you?
I think it's a big problem that if you cannot get diverse information, if you are the potential victim of propaganda, of manipulation. The thing is that I don't think that we should necessarily just see it as a counter-sanction to our efforts. I think it might have happened anyway, because they seem so determined not to tell the population the truth that it might have happened. Journalists have had to leave Russia in big numbers, because if you use the word war, you may risk imprisonment for a very, very long time. And this is, of course, why from our side it's been part of the sanctioning, that you cannot have Russia Today or Sputnik, because this is not a question of freedom of speech. This is a question of whether or not you will accept that kind of propaganda, that kind of manipulation with huge groups of population.
It also sort of raises the question about social media, where we sometimes think of it as a force for evil, where you can spread disinformation or hate or genocide, all sorts of terrible things. But in this case, also, it can be a force for good, in that you can get truth and opposition and dissent. So it's an interesting balance. Do you think social media is a force for good?
I definitely think it's a force for good. As most things, there are two sides of the same coin, and we have seen both sides. But it is important for people to share, to mobilize, to be able to create the sense that I'm part of something bigger. I'm part of a community. And this is one of the main reasons as to why we want to see, well, how can we harness the dark side of tech in order to unleash all the potential that comes with it.
How do you do that? That's what you're working on.
Yeah, that's what we're working on, but it has also been something that big tech has been interested for some time. We have this code of conduct, which has now been strengthened in order for the platforms themselves to take more responsibility. But we see that, voluntary is not quite enough. It won't get us there.
So what about the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act? That's something you're very involved in.
Yes.
It's moving through Europe. I got a little bit of a, if you could just bring us up to speed on what those two bills are and what they would do.
Well, the Digital Markets Act, the aim is really simple. It's just to make sure that markets are open, that they are contestable, so that your success depends on your idea, your work ethics, your funding, getting to your customer, that it will not depend on someone else, what we would call a gatekeeper. So that it's you who can actually make it as an innovator, as an entrepreneur, as a business. Digital Services Act would make sure that what is illegal offline will also be seen and dealt with as illegal online. So it's both products, that if you have a platform, you need to know your business customers so that you know that if there is a problem, they can take the responsibility. If it's bad quality or harmful substances or there's another problem, it's a fake something. But probably the most interesting thing is when it comes to social media, that you get an obligation to take down what is flagged to you as illegal. But if your post is then taken down, you also get a chance to say, well, no. You might be hurt because of what I'm saying, but it's not illegal. And then have a fair chance of putting it up again. But I say for me in social media, I think the most important thing is that platforms will be obliged to do sort of a horizontal risk assessment. Can my services be abused to undermine democracy? Can my services be abused, or are they in themselves a mental health risk? Because I think that is some of the things that we're all struggling with. Is this healthy for us, or is there a trade-off between profit and health? And is that trade-off not always to the benefit of health?
So all these businesses would have to answer these questions
Exactly.
to be online. So one of the criticisms there is that it's harder for smaller and medium-sized businesses than large businesses to do that. They don't have the resources, they don't have the manpower, they don't have the time and the wherewithal, and then it becomes a burden and a cost to be online in Europe.
And this is why this Digital Services Act is sort of asymmetrical. So the bigger you are, the more responsibility. The smaller you are, the fewer things you will have to deal with, exactly for these reasons. Because smaller businesses, they will not have an army of lawyers. They will not necessarily have any of the things that would be needed if they were to have the same responsibility. But also, they don't have the scope. They don't have, the footprints that big tech would have. So we try to balance the two.
What about targeting of American companies? That's always the criticism. You've heard that ever since you've been doing this. But there have been complaints and at least objections raised by the US government, right, to some of these rules, that it is just a law that goes after US big tech.
What we've been trying to do is to say, well, what would make a gatekeeper? So I've been looking at some of the competition cases that we've had to say, well, here we call it dominant position. What kind of market power allows you to make it really difficult for smaller competitors? And then we have translated that into a set of objective criteria, some of them in numbers, some of them in qualities. And they will go for everyone who will do business in Europe. For European businesses, for Chinese businesses, everyone will be in the same framework.
But the main gatekeepers of the internet are Silicon Valley, right? They're US tech.
Yeah, for now.
Why doesn't Europe have any big tech companies like that?
Well, I think we failed in two quite fundamental respects. We didn't provide a digital single market, so very national markets when things were getting started 10, 15 years ago. And we didn't provide sufficient capital. And you need capital to grow, which meant that what is now big tech had the chance to get, a strong foothold in the US. There's a different sort of sense of, I want to invest in you, and there is a great market here. So we've been working on these things in order for the next chapter of digitization, when everything digitalizes, agriculture, energy, mobility, everything, that there is a fair go wherever you come from, because there is a real digital single market, and there is a different access also to risk-willing capital.
I do want to get to some of the questions. some of them. I'll read one that goes along with this conversation, which is how are you working with regulators in non-EU countries to streamline regulations? In some cases, advocate for stronger international law. Is that possible?
It's part of the aim with the Trade and Technology Council that we have created with US counterparts. My colleague Valdis Dombrovskis and myself are honored to lead it on the European side. The ambition is not to do the same regulation, but to see where can we align. And for instance, on how we look at artificial intelligence, there is this alignment. So we have proposed from the European side to look at the risk in use cases. So not to regulate the technology in itself, but to look at what it's being used for.
Is this the AI Act?
Yes. And here, actually, one of the first deliverables from the Trade and Technology Council was this alignment between the two of us as to how to look at this.
What is the AI Act?
Well, the AI Act is basically our way of saying there are so many use cases where we will have no regulatory touch. Because if my music streaming service suggests something to me that I don't like, I'll just go find something else. But if a government in Europe would want to do a social scoring system, well, we think that should be forbidden. And then you have sort of a small, soft in between, where it's say in this situation, actually there's a risk that there will be a bias that will discriminate against your gender or your ethnical background or your religious background. Here, we really need to know what we're doing. And because of that, we hope that we can create the necessary trust in artificial intelligence for it to be used in health, in public service, in general, in the business community. Because trust is basically, for us, we see that as the key to full digitization.
Does it encourage investment and building value and innovation? Because that's always the concern when you regulate something too much, that over-regulation can kill that investment and innovation and value and growth that we also want.
No, but I completely agree with you on that. So with the AI Act, we also have an investment program to sort of encourage that investments take place. But I also think that, we've had the first scandals where AI have been asked to help out in social services, turns out completely biased. Not a good situation for any government. So we hope that with this kind of regulation, we can create the necessary trust. And one thing is a given in Europe, you have a big public sector. So if you can make that public sector trust that you can use AI, you're opening for innovation in a very, very large area for private businesses, for universities to be engaged, for private-public partnerships. So in that respect, something that for us is seen as creating trust is also opening for innovation.
What happened with the social services, the mistrust? What was the example?
Well, basically, as far as I remember, sort of the AI assumed that if you had a certain postcode, you would not be eligible. And,
That's probably wrong.
It's probably wrong.
Yeah.
It may be, in some instances, right, but it's probably wrong. And the government fell. So not a good situation. I don't think any mayor would want to do the same thing. Not anyone responsible for the police force would use AI if you could not make sure that it was not biased. So I think this is really crucial.
When does that pass? What is the time frame of the AI? Because you're still looking at a soon passage for the digital services and digital markets.
Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act are really high priority. So we hope that we will be done with the final negotiations by April, which means that it could come into effect. Digital Markets Act, 1st of January, Digital Services Act, some Q2, maybe 2023. The AI Act, a bit longer, maybe we would be done negotiating that in a year or so.
Okay, I want to make some news here. You announced just on Friday that you are looking into this secretive deal that Google or Alphabet and Meta made on ad services.
Yes.
Tell us about that. That's a new one.
Yeah, it's an agreement called Jedi Blue. So this is also what we call our case, Jedi Blue. It's a follow-up investigation on something actually, well, very topical now in Texas, that the Texas General Attorney filed some time ago. And the agreement seems to be, and it's early days, so we have no conclusions, seems to be an agreement between Google and Facebook that Facebook should not use a competing ads service. Because all of a sudden there was competition to Google in placing ads. And what it seems is that they didn't like it.
So what can you do about that?
Well, the first thing, of course, is to see if this is true. It may not be true. Mm-hmm. So we need to get the evidence. And here we are working with the CMA, so the Competition Authority in the UK. And if we are right, of course, there will be sanctions, because if we are right, it is illegal.
How long have you been doing this role? 8, 9?
7 years.
7 years, okay. So I've been covering Commissioner Vestager for 7 years and talking to her the whole time. And we always have these new cases that your team is working so hard on. And there have been fines, and there have been directives to change behavior. And I wonder how much progress you feel you've made on cases like this and some of the others we've talked about through the years. Apple, Google, those are the sexy ones that I always ask you about. Do you think there's been a real change in how these companies operate in Europe?
No, I don't think there's been a real change, not fundamental change. This is why we bring in regulation, because we still need the individual competition cases. But what we have seen is that they may change behavior exactly in the area of that case. You know, in the Android case, if Google search Chrome is pre-installed, well, you get a choice screen so that you can choose another search provider. So that, of course, within the framework of that case, that is real change. In the Google Shopping case, merchants are seen so much more often than before the case. That is real change. But you see change within the casework that we do. In one of the first Amazon cases that we settled, it was on ebooks. We took commitments on actually all language ebooks, and that allowed for the ebook market still to be open. So there are other ebook providers than Amazon. So within these areas, you do see change. But we just made a sector inquiry into the Internet of Things, sort of everything consumer-oriented, voice assistants and that. And here we see the same behavior. We see...
by the same actors?
By the same actors. We see the same behavior. We see the tendency to self-preference. We see the same things. And this is why we call in regulation, because if you have a systemic issue, you need to solve it in a systemic way.
There have also been a lot of fines levied. Some of them have been paid. Some of them have ended up for years in court. So is that the right approach, or is that just because it's within your power, that's something that you can do, if that's not changing their behavior ultimately?
We do three things at the same time when we take a decision. So we fine past illegal behavior. Then we say, stop what you're doing and don't put anything with a similar effect in its place. And then thirdly, figure out how you can remedy the harm that you've done. And the third thing is the critical thing, and it's really difficult. And this is why also the regulation ought to speed up things. Because if first harm is done in a market, so because of network effects and marginal costs coming down to zero, market is tipping, it's really difficult for competitors to have a fair go if there has been an illegal behavior also at present here. So this is why new legislation should give the necessary speed in order for harm not to be so deep as we have seen it in some of the competition cases.
We have a good question from the audience, one that I was going to ask, which is, can certain big tech companies have threatened to pull out of the EU market with the onset of these new regulations? How do you balance regulation against some of those threats?
It's for any company to decide what is their business strategy. And so far, it has been a good business strategy to do business in Europe.
There are a few 100 million people.
450, and most of them, they have, money in their pocket.
Fair enough. But you do often get this charge that what you're doing is protectionist.
Yeah, but, I think it's legitimate that in a democracy that those who are elected, that they take responsibility to say, this is how we do things here. And I think it's about time, maybe actually a bit overdue, because we allow the digital world to develop from next to nothing to something that, really takes a lot of prominence in our lives. And with that expansion of the digital part of our lives, it has sort of squeezed out democracy and rule of law. And I think it's about time that democracy comes back, and maybe also sometimes comes back with a vengeance, to make sure that we live in democracy, be that digital or be that in the physical world. And especially now, talking about metaverse, when the two things becomes, more and more sort of organically integrated. We need democracy to sustain itself, to say it's legitimate that we set the rules.
So you're going after the metaverse next?
Well, first I try to understand what it is.
Do you?
I don't think so.
It's difficult.
Yeah, because I'm not a gamer, and I think those who really game, they have a much better sense of what does it mean to have a presence in a world where you can go in and out, and where you make friends, and where you have conversations, and where you take action.
Where do you even begin to stand up democracy in that world that's so hard to figure out, that we think is coming? Certainly there's a lot of hype around it and a lot of excitement.
Yes, and probably it will take longer than the excitement and the hype will suggest. But then even more important that we try to figure out what it is, because eventually I think there will be a metaverse dimension to our lives. One of the reasons why I have my doubts as to how fast it will be is that we all seem really to enjoy to get back together again, to get out of the Zoom meetings and the team meetings.
But we can be together in the metaverse, I think.
That's the point, but I think we will still be sort of tiptoeing in there to figure out if we can some of the things that we missed in Zoom, like negotiating, brainstorming, having fun. So remains to be seen. But of course, also in the metaverse, there must be a rule of law and competition.
Of course. What about NFTs? Is that something you're looking into? Crypto, I know, is not exactly in your portfolio, but it overlaps.
It's a new, the NFTs is a new thing. I find it really interesting because it first of all, it sort of questions everything you would know about value. And second, maybe it's a new way for artists and musicians and to get a stronger bite of the value that they create, and that obviously is really, really interesting. So we follow, but it takes us a bit of time because we start to recruit new people. Not every lawyer is a gamer, at least not in that respect. And we
are any of them?
I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
But we would need to get more people on board. I had a very interesting experience because I had a group of 3 people advising me in the last mandate. We were preparing the Digital Markets Act, and it was a lawyer, an economist, and a technologist. And to see the 3 of them working together, that in itself was really interesting because it took them some time to get used to it. But then once they did it, what they achieved was really, really interesting.
While we're on the subject of new technologies that are exciting and that you're looking at, what else is out there? Quantum, is that something you've looked at yet?
Quantum is something that we are looking at, but not from a sort of a competition point of view, but as we want this to happen. And what we see is that there are some very interesting environments. Of course, we see the first quantum computers running, but far from mainstream yet. And then the co-development from the quantum computer to the quantum software. so that the two comes together. There you find some of the ecosystems in Europe that is absolutely sort of cutting edge on a world-class level.
Congress has, I mean, we're talking about quantum and the metaverse. Congress can't figure out even the sort of social media, technology, regulation, what to do about it. There are a number of bills that have been introduced, very little movement. You have conversations with some of your counterparts in Washington. What is your sense of the progress or lack thereof on this issue, on these issues that you tackle?
Well, I have noticed a change, because when I was going up the hill with my first Google case under my arm, they would like, "What's that woman doing?" And from there to sort of the alignment that we feel today, so much have happened. And if you look at what people seem to think about big tech, social media, that kind of stuff, also here, things have changed quite dramatically. So actually, if you ask people in Europe and people here, you'd see that also on a bipartisan way, they think more or less the same. That technology is great, but we also need regulation.
But we haven't gotten any, really, in the US.
No, but you have, I think there are really...
Does that make that harder for you?
No, we have a different tradition. We're not, in Europe, we're not afraid of regulation. We're not afraid of stepping in to say, well, come on.
That surprised me that you got applause for that. Because we don't like regulation.
No, but just see what it can actually do. And of course, there are different cultures, there are different democratic ways of doing things. But I don't see that we can get to where we want to go. For instance, having such a simple thing as an open, contestable market, if we're not willing to regulate. And you know, privately I wonder, because I have been in the US, I've been traveling the US for the last 30 years. And one of the things that always, you know, is really, really strong is the belief in every individual, every human being, the integrity of everyone. And I don't understand why it was Europe who had the first go at privacy. It's, as coming from the outside, it's such an obvious thing. In the US, with that integrity, with that respect of each and every one, then privacy ought to be, you know, of course.
The GDPR.
GDPR or a version of it. And here Europe was first. And there also here, you know, the respect and the way that a smaller business is cherished, encouraged, you know, moved on, to make sure that the market is open and contestable, well, that ought to be, you know, a fundamental US idea.
Is it something that companies, I wonder, are tackling and can tackle themselves? For instance, Apple now put in place some new measures that are hurting the likes of Facebook and Snap, where people do have to opt in to get themselves tracked by advertisers. That's an effort on privacy, isn't it?
That's definitely an effort on privacy, and it also shows that if you make privacy available,
People
choose
it.
Do you want this app to track you while you're not using it? Then people say, no.
Right.
So if privacy is available, understandable, well, what's not to like?
Who's the worst actor of the big techs?
Oh, that's so much to choose from.
Top three.
No, I think for me, the interesting thing is that they're very different. And I think you should ask them themselves, because there's fierce competition between them.
They all insist that they are not monopolies. Are they monopolies?
Well, we would say, yes, they definitely have a dominant position.
Google, monopoly.
Well, Google, we have shown it. For Apple, we have shown it. In some of the markets, yes, definitely having that kind of dominant position that gives them also the market power to abuse that position.
But you wouldn't break them up, would you? I know that you can't necessarily
Yeah.
do that in Europe, but would you be in favor of that?
Well, we could do it if we had something that can only be solved by breaking up the company. It's a really far-reaching thing to do. And we have not had the case yet where we would say, well, the only thing that can solve this situation is breaking up the company. Obviously, we are following very, very closely what will happen with the lawsuit that has been tabled here. I think the first day in court will be by 2023. So that will be really, really interesting to see what will happen in that Facebook ecosystem.
The FTC case?
Yeah.
Do you agree with that approach? I think they're going after Facebook and they want them to divest acquisitions that they approved several years ago. Would that accomplish anything?
I don't know. I don't know what it will accomplish. Sometimes, we have this myth about the Hydra, that every time you cut off one head, boof, you have many more. I don't know, because it really depends on what are the market dynamics. One of the choices that we have made is to say, we actually do think that we can see how regulation will work. We can see what it is that we want to achieve, and we hope that we can get there. And actually here, I think there's also kind of a value that we have in common, that if you have great power, you also have great responsibility.
Mm-hmm. So how often are you in touch with some of these companies, their CEOs, their lawyers?
Well, not that often, actually, depending on sort of the timing of the cases. The teams have quite a lot of interaction, because if there's something that you're doubtful about or how to deal with, and of course the teams get more and more involved. And now when it seems that the Digital Markets Act will actually be a real thing on ground quite soon, then of course it's important for us to help businesses understand what are our obligations, what can we do, what can we not do. So at different levels, there's a lot of interaction.
Do they get it? Are they on board with the digital markets and digital services?
I think that remains to be seen. Because first things first, if the legislation is not challenged in court, of course that will be a big, important step. It will not hold up its implementation on ground, but of course it will be a token of appreciation of the fact that democracy have had an idea about how should things work within the European market.
While we're on the subject of antitrust, I did want to ask you, there's a debate sort of happening in this country right now, and it's relevant for Europe as well. We've got sky-high inflation, 40-year high levels, I think record levels in Europe. And one of the tactics that the Biden administration is looking at is going after monopolies or companies, industries, for raising prices or keeping prices high, exacerbating inflation. Does that seem like an effective way to bring down inflation to you?
Well, of course, it's part of the answer. Because if you see that businesses are so concentrated that you can easily pass on increases in input prices, instead of maybe having to absorb part of it yourself, so that profits get a bit subdued for a period of time, then, of course, it's one of the things that you need to look at. In Europe now, 30–35% of inflation comes from energy prices. So, of course, we also looking at if there is an antitrust problem in how things are working, or there is a market problem in how the market mechanisms are working, in order to see if we can break the link between some of the input markets and the prices that consumers are faced with.
Are you finding any evidence of monopolies or companies that are able to pass on these higher prices?
We're in the process of investigating it, but we have no conclusions so far.
I want to take some audience questions as well. How do you think the DSA and DMA will impact the rest of the world?
We hope that more jurisdictions will take inspiration from it. Not to copy, I don't think one should copy anyone else, but to take the inspiration to say, no, we also want technology to thrive, but we want that to happen in a competitive market. And we want the fundamental respect of what we have decided in the offline world is illegal, also to be so in the online world. I think that's one of the very sort of simple principles that I would hope to serve as inspiration. We will start implementing it, and it will probably show that there are things that we could do better. So of course, for us, it will also be a learning period of time when we start implementing it. So maybe some would say, we just need to assess how they're doing in Europe before we sort of take it. But I do hope that it will serve as inspiration, because it needs a global community really to create a world where technology serves us as humans and not the other way around.
Yeah, we've had a few questions now about the sort of lack of international coordination here. We talked about Russia. What about China? Where are they on all of this? Because in one sense, they are regulating some of their big tech companies, but in a very different way. And when it comes to disinformation and propaganda, that is rampant.
Yeah, if you, for instance, see the approach to social scoring, you know, we want to make it forbidden. They seem to be experimenting with how far can they push it. So I think the approach to technology is really fundamentally different. Because we are trying to make sure that technology serves people, that it serves society, that we see it as something that can help us build the societies that we dream of, as people, as communities, as civil society. And that is a different approach, because in China it seems to be, you know, so much more state-driven, that technology should serve the purpose of the state. And that is not our idea, basically.
Is there any coordination between what you're doing and your counterparts in China?
Actually, we used to have what we call sort of a high-level digital dialogue. The last one was before the pandemic, and it was a chance to discuss things that we disagree on. The only thing that really came of it was an agreement to try to figure out how to make sure that product standards, when digitally traded, actually works. Because it has been a problem, at least for us, that some of the e-commerce from Chinese vendors has produced a lot of products that did not live up to European standards when it comes to security and all of that we want a product to live up to.
Where is that heading? Because second biggest economy, you know, there are already issues around Huawei, and it feels like this is going in a dangerous place. The US and Europe, with the value system, the changing world order as a result of the war in Ukraine, and then, of course, all being fought in the digital space. How do you think about that?
Well, I think it's important to be able to master a quite complex relationship with China. They're an economic competitor, a systemic rival as to how should society be governed, but they're also a partner, because there's no way we can fight climate change without having China on board. No way. So it's important, I think, to be able to shift between these three different dimensions, because China is a fact of life, but we just have to figure out how to make sure that we stand up for what we believe in. Because I definitely think that we should leave the Chinese to be Chinese. At least I can tell the Europeans we're not good at it.
Good answer. This is a personal question, sort of. What skill set and expertise do you bring to your role that you believe should serve as an inspiration for those brave enough to follow in your footsteps?
Oh, that's assuming that I'm not having a third mandate.
I was going to ask what's next.
It's a shock to me. No.
You can have a third mandate, can you?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes. I have colleagues right now who are in the third mandate.
Okay.
Well, actually, I don't think that it's a technological competence. I think it's more, my husband and I, we've always been living a bit sort of on the shabby side because we were more into sort of societal design, that home decor.
What does that mean?
No, we didn't really care, if the cushions would match the season or something like that. No, not at all. But I think...
Just your outfits to match the cushions.
Yes, actually to be a little bit sort of incognito here. I didn't see this coming. No, I think the most important ambition that one can have is to create opportunities for other people. To have the willingness, knowing that one will make mistakes, to try to shape society to serve that purpose. That people have options, that whatever happens, there is a door, and if you turn the handle, it will open, instead of just a brick wall in front of you. I think that's my main driver, and at least it works for me, gets me up in the morning.
How did you come to this? You were a politician in Denmark. How did this become your area?
Well, I saw that it was not the case. I grew up in a very open home. Everyone would come to see my parents because of their work. They were ministers in the Danish church, both of them. So everyone would come. So I would see, the full spectrum of society, and it was just so different. What were the options? So it's, for me, not everyone can be whatever they want to be, but everyone can have a fair chance of making a go at it.
But when did it become the tech side of things, the digital expertise? Well,
I think that for me, technology is a bit like climate change. It happens.
It's inevitable.
This is something, it's inevitable, something that will, and if we do not, try to shape it, then obviously it will shape us. It is shaping us already. It has done so for a very long time. So if we want to make sure that technology serves us, and that technology creates new opportunities, new ways of learning, new ways of people being part of society, new ways for people to think that they are counted in, that people rely on them, well, then we have to work with technology in a different way than we do today. Also, just because that the people capable, it's not a diverse community. There are too few women. Mm-hmm. There are too few generations. And in an open, dynamic society, it must be for more than just 2 generations and in general, most male.
Can't the companies do that on their own? Or you think that has to come from government?
I think a lot can be done by the companies themselves. But of course, governments will need to provide education, learning opportunities. If we still think that we have give or take 8 million sort of digital experts in Europe right now, we think we need 20 million by 2030. If we do nothing, we'll have 12. So the delta is 8 million people. That will take a lot of government effort to make sure that there are educational programs, that there's encouragement, but it cannot be done without companies. Because companies say, oh, she did that, and he did that, and they did that. And so that people see that, oh, wow, it opens doors. It's new opportunities. So I think public-private could be great here.
Sort of more technical question. Does open source software play a role in ensuring transparency and trust on critical shared infrastructure as a public good and for national security? Open source software.
Yeah, I think it serves a lot of purpose, especially when public sector invests in technology to make sure that it is open for others to work with, so that you can have different providers coming in. And I think also the entire concept of open source creates sort of a culture of transparency. And that culture of transparency could also enable more data sharing, that more companies get access to data that is being Internet of Things data, for instance, all the data that comes from sensors. So open source, transparency, data access, I think that would create a much more dynamic digital economy.
Few privacy questions to get to from the audience. Can you reflect a bit? We mentioned GDPR on the implementation there and related regulations. What has been successful and what still might need some work?
I think what still needs work is to make privacy easy. You know, that it's not, I do my cookie settings, and that is primarily because my husband says that I have too much stuff. So when I'm done with my cookie settings, I forgot what I wanted to buy.
That's why you need cookies.
Yes, so it works well, but maybe other people don't have that problem. So ease of privacy. That you know, this is easy, it's accessible, and I feel in control. You know, I really, really want people to feel that they are in control. And here, I think we still have some way to go. What I think is successful is that by now, many people know that they have rights. I'm just not just sort of a pawn in a game of chess. I have my own rights. But the next thing is, of course, to empower people so that they can enforce them.
I was wondering what phone, are you an Apple phone user?
Yes.
Yeah. I wonder if Apple, what's your relationship like with Apple these days?
Well, the relationship with my phone is great.
You fought that tax case in Ireland for so long. That was such a big case. And ultimately, what did you learn from that? You ultimately lost that one. What did you learn from that?
Well, now the case is under appeal and remains to be seen. But losing it in the first instance, you know, of course, you know, in my job that you can lose a case. But it's a different thing to knowing that you can lose a case and to lose a case. It sits a completely different place in your body.
That one hurt.
So that's pretty awful. But it also taught me that you can live with losing. And if you're not willing to lose, well, you will take no risks. And no matter how well we prepared, how solid we think this case is, there is a risk. And you must be willing to take that risk. Because there is the case in itself, but the taxes they paid, well, they didn't grow by losing it. And they were very small.
And you can also go after them on the App Store now.
But that is only because there may be an illegal thing in the App Store, not because we lost another case.
Right, of course. Didn't mean to suggest that. Why, we kind of hit that. How will a generational shift in political parties play a role in the need for deeper policy development to regulate big tech? And how urgent is it?
I think that's a very good point.
Yeah.
That how we see technology will change with generations. Because if you have, you know, a more sort of lived relationship with technology, I think you ask a different set of questions. And I also think you have felt and experienced technology differently, which means that you will relate also to the regulation around it in a different way. And you will know much more what is possible. You will also better understand the business models. So I think that with new generations of politicians, of legislators, it may actually be a tougher stance on technology.
Well, who could forget there was a hearing not that long ago in Congress where they were asking Mark Zuckerberg how Facebook worked and how it makes money. I mean, I think that's one of the problems with why it hasn't happened here quite as quickly. It's just a general, fundamental not understanding and a generational difference of who's using these social media platforms and technology.
But I think it has been, now people realize that it's not for free. I think that was one of the very, strong achievements of tech companies to make us believe that it was for free. And I think that has been broken. And that's a watershed moment that you realize that, okay, I don't pay necessarily with my credit card, but then I pay with my data. I think that is really important. And the second thing important is that it has also the illusion that competition is just a click away. Also, that has been broken, that illusion. Because there's so many things that can be set up to keep you in that ecosystem. And I think people realize that so much more, that it's not neutral, that you can be manipulated, that you can be in on your way down a rabbit hole. And when those illusions are broken, then the openness to take action changes.
We have a minute left. I always like to end panels by asking for predictions, so something we can hold you to hopefully when we all meet here again next year. So in the next, we are at this interesting sort of critical point coming out of COVID, dealing with this horrific war, and seeing lots of technological changes and regulations. What's a prediction you can give us about something you're going to work on or something we'll see out of Europe in the next year?
Well, I think the most important thing to watch is how we implement. Can we make things work on ground for real? Can we produce real change? Combination of competition cases and regulation actually fully implemented on ground. Can we make that work? I think that will be one of the really interesting things to follow. Because now we have tabled quite a lot of legislation to write the digital rulebook. Of course, it's relevant if it makes change on ground. If businesses see we have better access to data, if businesses see we have better access to market, if businesses see we have better funding for our innovation in order to scale our companies, that is what is interesting. What happens on ground? This is where our ambition lies. This is where our focus lies. If we're successful, that is what to discuss this year, next year, and the year after.
Let me ask, are there any companies that get it right? Any tech companies that are big and thriving and successful?
I think that there are many companies that get it right.
Who's the model behavior?
And obviously, there's also sides of big tech that get it perfectly right. I think a lot of people are really thankful for what has been the response to the war in Ukraine, sort of stepping up, saying we are part of the system, we understand completely why these sanctions are important. Because in my work, I'm not against the company, I'm against a certain behavior. And a huge number of people in Europe, millions and millions, they enjoy the services of big tech every day. And I think it will remain that way. The point is only that it should not only be big tech. It should be an open, contestable market. And what is illegal offline is illegal online.
You have your work cut out for you. Thank you so much, Commissioner Vestager.
Well, thank you very much.